Franciscan spirituality is also about love and acceptance, about loving myself as a unique and valued child of God. It's also about accepting myself in my human frailty, in my vulnerability, in my shadows, that I am loved, that I am cherished, that I am respected and valued as a child of God. Powerful words, aren't they? So what is this charisma that Francis of Assisi is teaching you and I today about loving and accepting ourselves as a child of God? Not a follower of religion. Religion, as we know, is man-made. Spirituality, as we've discussed in previous videos, is God-given. It's a way of life for the soul within to embrace the soul and the beating heart of the mystical heart of God. Francis never professed to be anything other than Francis. He was fiery, he had a love of beauty, and he was human. And an eye for the women, oh yes. But the one remarkable quality of this man is, despite his failings, his impetuosity, despite his vulnerability, even in death, he demonstrated a humility that is the hallmark of his relationship with a loving God. And yes, though he was a Christian, a Catholic Christian, he never pushed religion down the throats of the ordinary men and women. He introduced them to a simpler way of living. And it wasn't his intention to create a monastic order like we have today in the world, where we have thousands of men and women living in different branches of the Franciscan family. All Francis wanted to do was to reawaken that divine spark in the hearts of ordinary men and women. And in so doing, to cultivate a seedbed where Mother Earth would water two important gifts. Gifts that God gives to you and me each day. To love oneself, not to hate oneself. And yet we live in a culture today where so many young children and young adults stand in front of a mirror and they have this self-loathing. For some reason or another, they cannot embrace their inner beauty because they're blinded by their physical faults and failings, their imperfections, because they're in a society where the media dictates to them how they should look, how they should feel, and what they should become. And many young girls today become anorexic, are affected by bulimia, because they resent how they feel, how they look, and as soon as they look in the mirror, they become obsessive with weight gain. They find it hard to see their inner beauty. And instead of embracing the divine within, they sacrifice the divine on the altars of fear through self-loathing. And there's an inability to accept themselves as a beautiful child of God. So Francis and his love of creation and his love of God gives us a blueprint to look in the mirror, as many of us do, and not see the extra flab as I have. You know, when people say to me, Brother Sean, lift up your head, lift up your chin, and then they conclude by saying, and now lift up the other one. At first, when I used to hear that, I used to sulk. But now I'm not really bothered. But Francis allows us to look into the spiritual mirror of God's love, and not to see what our mind is telling us, but to see what the heart is experiencing, to look into our eyes and see the eyes of a loving God. Because they do say, and it's true, the eyes are the window of the soul. I've been so privileged in my faith journey as a young nursing monk at the bedside of many a dying patient, and again in my professional life as a qualified nurse. I've been so humbled and privileged to have been allowed to walk alongside God's wounded children. And yet, despite their intense suffering and man's inhumanity to man to them, especially those who've been sexually abused, you look into their eyes as you hold their hands, and you enter a mystery. You enter a pathway of love. And that pathway to love is an invitation from the mystical heart of God to come and explore the beauty of God in creation. And in those eyes you can see God. You can see the beauty of God, though the body is falling apart. But there is a spark of beauty. And that's what Francis shows us through this wonderful way of life we call Franciscan spirituality. He reawakens that divine spark that we brought into this incarnation as a child of God. He allows us see beyond what the mind perceives as beauty. The mind plays havoc, and the mind wants us to put ourselves down. We're never going to be good enough in the eyes of our mind. And what we perceive as beauty is not always what God sees as beauty. So we need to come to that special place when we enter our interior castle to embrace the mystical heart of God in prayer. We need to be courageous. We need courage, like Francis, like Jesus, like Gandhi, like Archbishop Romero, like Corrie ten Boom, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Teresa of Avila, Sri Chinmoy, many other of God's great Olympians. They weren't obsessive about how they looked. They were obsessive about their spiritual path and completing the tasks God had asked of them. So today, Franciscan spirituality for me is about empowering me to love myself, to forgive myself, and to accept myself in my human frailty, but to see to the eyes of God, of God's love, that I am loved, I'm respected, I'm valued, and that there is a purpose and a meaning for my life and my being here. Thank you for listening.